Morning they came to take my house. It was still dark outside. I remember standing at the front door in my flannel robe, the kind of November cold that comes off Lake Ontario cutting right through the screen, and watching a man in a gray uniform walk up my driveway holding a clipboard. Behind him, across Millbrook Crescent, my son-in-law was leaning against his truck with a coffee in one hand and a smirk on his face. He actually raised the cup toward me, like a toast. I'd built that house in 1987, poured the basement footings myself one August weekend with my brother-in-law and 2 cases of Molson Canadian. My wife Sandra had picked the kitchen tiles, peach-colored. She always said they made the morning light look warmer. She'd been gone 11 years by then, and I still hadn't changed those tiles. The officer, a young man, maybe 30, clearly uncomfortable, handed me the envelope and told me I had 48 hours to vacate. He said it quietly, like he was apologizing. The papers inside indicated the property had been transferred by power of attorney to my daughter, and that she had subsequently sold it to a numbered company registered in Ontario. Possession date had already passed, apparently. I was, according to these documents, trespassing in my own home. My son-in-law called out from across the street. "Take what you need, Frank. We're not monsters." He laughed at his own joke. I looked at the officer. I looked at the papers. Then I asked him one question. "Son, do you know who notarized this document?" He looked down at the form, then back up at me, and his face did something I'll never forget. It went completely still. I should tell you who I am, because it matters to the story. My name is Frank Ogilvie. I spent 31 years as a forensic accountant with the Ontario Securities Commission, the last 12 as a senior investigator. I've testified in 64 trials. I've sat across from some of the most sophisticated financial criminals this country has ever produced and watched them lie with absolute confidence. I know what fraud looks like. I know what it smells like. And I know, better than most, exactly what it takes to unwind it. I retired in 2019. My daughter Vanessa had been after me to sign a power of attorney since 2020. She framed it as concern. I was 67, she said. What if something happened? What if I had a fall, a stroke, a moment of confusion? Didn't I want someone trusted to handle things? She was my only child. Of course I trusted her. What I didn't fully see, not yet, was what her husband, my son-in-law Brett, had been building in the background. Brett sold investment properties, or said he did. He had the vocabulary for it: cap rates, cash flow projections, equity leveraging, and he used it constantly at every family dinner, every holiday gathering, until Sandra's sister started calling him the broker behind his back. He'd married Vanessa in 2015. I'd tried to like him. I genuinely had, but there was always something slightly off about the way he looked at things, including my house, including me, like he was calculating rather than living. In the spring of 2021, Vanessa brought me a document she said a lawyer had prepared. It was a standard continuing power of attorney for property, she explained. For my protection, she sat at my kitchen table under Sandra's peach-colored tiles and watched me read through it. It looked legitimate. There was a law firm letterhead. Holloway and Crane, a name I didn't recognize but didn't question. There were proper signature blocks, witness lines, a commissioner's stamp. I signed it. I want to say I had a moment of hesitation. I want to say something felt wrong. But the truth is, she was my daughter. She had her mother's eyes. And I was tired in a way that retirement sometimes brings. Not physically tired, but hollowed out. Like the urgency that had kept me sharp for 31 years had simply switched off. I signed it and poured us both a cup of tea. 18 months later, she used that document to transfer my house. The first I knew something was wrong was a letter from the Canada Revenue Agency about a property transaction I hadn't made. I called Vanessa. She didn't answer. I called Brett. His number went straight to voicemail. I drove to their house in Oakville, a house I'd lent them $60,000 toward in 2018, money they'd never repaid, and found it empty. Not between tenants empty. Cleared out empty. Mail piled at the door. Neighbor told me they'd been gone 3 weeks. I called a real estate lawyer that same afternoon. He pulled the land registry and confirmed it. My property on Millbrook Crescent had been transferred by power of attorney 6 weeks earlier to 2847 391 Ontario Inc. The sale price recorded was $340,000. The assessed value of my home at that time was $890,000. I sat in that lawyer's office and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not panic, not grief, something colder than that. Something that, if I'm honest, felt a little like focus returning. Who notarized the POA, I asked. He checked the document. A commissioner of oaths. Name is Philip Garland. Can you get me a copy of the full notarization page? He could. He did. I took it home and sat at my kitchen table with a magnifying glass and 31 years of experience, and I looked at that stamp for a long time. Philip Garland had been suspended from practice by the Law Society of Ontario in March 2020. The POA I'd signed was dated November 2020. A suspended commissioner cannot legally notarize anything, which meant the document was defective at its foundation, which meant the transfer was void, which meant my house had not, in any legal sense, actually been sold. But I needed to be careful. I needed to do this right. I spent the next 3 weeks building the file. I called the OSC's fraud division, people I'd worked with for decades, not to pull favors but to understand the current landscape, who was handling what the appropriate channels were. I tracked down Philip Garland through the Law Society's public registry and, through a contact at a Bay Street firm, learned that he'd been providing notarization services under the table for cash since his suspension. Vanessa and Brett weren't the first. I hired a litigation lawyer named Patricia Chen, who specialized in property fraud. She was 42, wore no-nonsense glasses, and had a habit of tapping her pen against her thumbnail when she was thinking. The first time I laid out my documentation, the suspended commissioner records, the below-market sale price indicating possible money laundering, the numbered company's registration tracing back to Brett's cousin in Mississauga, she stopped tapping and looked up at me. You did all of this yourself. I was a forensic investigator for 31 years, I said. She smiled just slightly. Good. Then you know this is going to take patience. I told her I had nothing but time. Meanwhile, the numbered company sent a property management firm to do a walkthrough. I let them in. I was perfectly pleasant. I offered coffee. While they walked through the house taking notes on their tablets, I noted their names, their company registration number on their vehicle, and the specific wording they used when they told me I'd need to vacate by a date they'd be in touch about. I thanked them and went back to my kitchen. 2 weeks later, a bailiff arrived with a formal eviction notice. That was the morning Brett was across the street with his coffee. I want to describe that moment because I've thought about it many times since. Standing there in the gray dawn, holding papers that were legally worthless, watching my son-in-law perform his victory for an audience of one. He'd planned this. The timing of it, early disorienting, the cold, the uniform at the door. It was designed to humiliate, to make me feel small and old and finished. What he didn't know was that Patricia had filed an emergency motion to stay the eviction the afternoon before, which had been granted that morning at 8:15 a.m. by the Superior Court of Justice. The bailiff, to his credit, had not yet been notified. I'd like to make a phone call before we go any further, I told him. I called Patricia. She gave me the motion reference number. I handed the phone to the officer. His expression shifted several times in about 45 seconds. He handed the phone back. Sir, he said, I'm going to need to contact my office. Brett was still across the street. He'd stopped smiling. The court process took 7 months. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't a single dramatic courtroom scene. It was affidavits and cross-examinations and document productions and 3 separate motions. Patricia was methodical and relentless. The numbered company hired a lawyer who made a lot of noise about the validity of the POA and the completeness of the transfer, and every single argument dissolved when we introduced the Law Society suspension records and Philip Garland's own admission in a separate proceeding, facing his own charges, that he had notarized documents while suspended for money. Vanessa never testified. She filed an affidavit to her lawyer claiming she'd believed the POA was valid, that she'd been misled by Brett about the legitimacy of the process. Whether that was true or self-serving, I couldn't say with certainty. What I knew was that it placed the weight of the fraud squarely on her husband's shoulders. Brett had been careful, but not careful enough. He'd made the mistake that most financial fraudsters eventually make. He'd trusted his own cleverness more than the paper trail. And the paper trail, in my experience, is always there. You just have to be willing to follow it all the way. The Superior Court ruled the power of attorney invalid due to defective notarization. The property transfer was declared void. Ownership reverted to me. The numbered company was ordered to pay costs. The judge, a careful, deliberate woman named Justice Mahoney, noted in her ruling that the below-market transfer price and the involvement of a suspended commissioner suggested the matter warranted referral to the Crown for consideration of fraud charges. Brett was charged 6 months later. Fraud over $5,000, forgery, and a third charge related to Philip Garland's operation that I won't detail here because it's still before the courts. His cousin in Mississauga pleaded guilty to a lesser charge in a related matter. Vanessa called me the night Brett was charged. It was the first time we'd spoken in over a year. She was crying. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't known, not all of it, not the parts involving the suspended notary. She said she'd been scared of him for a long time and hadn't known how to get out. I don't know what the truth is. I've spent a career trying to establish truth, and I've learned that people can hold contradictory things inside themselves, genuine feeling and genuine wrongdoing, real fear and real complicity, and that sorting those things out is not always possible and not always mine to do. What I told her that night was that I wasn't going to discuss it until the legal process was finished. She said she understood. She hung up. My house is mine. The peach tiles are still in the kitchen. I had coffee this morning standing at the back window looking out at the yard. Same yard where I taught Vanessa to ride a bike on a Saturday in 1992. Same yard where Sandra sat every June with a book and a glass of iced tea until the summer she couldn't anymore. The Japanese maple we planted for her 25th anniversary is turning now. It goes a deep burgundy in November, almost the color of wine. I think about what I would say to someone in a similar position. Someone who's been handed papers they didn't expect, been made to feel small and old in their own doorway, watched someone they love stand on the other side of a street and laugh. What I'd tell them is this: there is a difference between being calm and being defeated. I was calm that morning because I was already working. Not because I'd given up, but because I understood, maybe better than most, that the tools that protect you are slow and procedural and not dramatic, and that you have to trust them anyway. You also have to do your homework. Fraud doesn't disappear because someone filed the right-looking papers. Paper trails exist. Records are kept. Suspensions are public. Every piece of deception leaves something behind. And if you know how to read documents, really read them, not just scan for your name but understand what every stamp and signature block and registration number means, then you are not as helpless as someone wants you to believe. Brett is awaiting trial. The proceedings are expected to take another year at least. I've been sleeping better than I have in years. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, trying to find the right words for what it actually taught me. Not the legal part, the human part. What Brett did wasn't random. It was built slowly, over years, out of a particular kind of thinking that I've seen more times than I can count in my career. The belief that other people's patience is weakness, that someone who doesn't fight loudly is incapable of fighting at all. He looked at me and saw an aging widower in a flannel robe. He saw someone whose best years were behind him. He made a calculation, and the calculation was wrong. And I think about why it was wrong more than I think about the outcome. It was wrong because he mistook stillness for surrender. I was calm that morning on the doorstep, not because I was beaten, but because I already understood the situation more clearly than he did. That kind of clarity. The kind that comes from decades of disciplined thinking, from learning to read what a document actually says, rather than what someone wants you to believe it says, that isn't something you lose when you retire. It stays with you. It's part of who you are. I've thought about Vanessa a great deal too. Whatever her role in what happened, whatever she knew or didn't know, she made choices that led her somewhere she clearly didn't want to end up. There's a cost to that, not a punishment handed down from somewhere outside yourself, just the natural weight of the direction you chose to walk in. She called me that night, crying, and I believe some of what she said was genuine. But I also know that genuine feeling doesn't erase genuine action. Those two things can exist at the same time, and sorting through them honestly takes a kind of moral courage that's harder than any legal proceeding. Patricia once said to me, after one of our longer days of document review, that most fraud cases she'd seen collapsed, not because the perpetrators were caught, but because they were careless. They trusted their own cleverness too much and stopped being careful. I've thought about that a lot, not just in relation to Brett, but in relation to myself. Integrity isn't something you perform when people are watching. It's the standard you hold yourself to when no one is, when the temptation is to cut a corner or look the other way or tell yourself that this one exception won't matter. It always matters. The paper trail always exists. What you do when no one's watching is exactly what eventually comes to light. What I'd want someone to take from this, if anything at all, is simply that none of these things are gifts you're born with or left without. The steadiness to keep working when you're frightened, the knowledge to understand what you're looking at, the willingness to do what's right when it would be easier not to. Those are built slowly through how you choose to live on the ordinary days. Brett had years to build something decent. He built something else instead. The Japanese maple is holding its color this week. November in Ontario has been mild. I had my coffee this morning at the back window, same as always, and I didn't feel triumphant exactly, just settled. Like the house and I have both been through something and are still standing. That's enough.